Davis, one shot, I'm Harry Kane on the pen. You can't risk a miss when you're trying to get 10. Rich for your love.
And this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about the ticketing system in England alongside with a little bit of youth development. I have my guest here, Matt Addison, who's worked alongside the Liverpool Echo and a range of other different things, but his main focus is on the Youth Development Academy at Liverpool FC. Would you like to just say a little bit about yourself mate, at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm training to be a journalist. I've done lots of work over the last couple of years, including with the Liverpool Echo and various other sites. I've covered other sports as well. I covered the Netball World Cup over the summer, but my main focus tends to be football, tends to be youth football as well, looking at Liverpool's academy, the under-18s, under-23s, but the first team as well, and just sort of dipping in and out when and where I can.
Great, thank you for that, Matt. We're going to be talking a lot today, obviously, about the English ticketing system and how a lot of fans have been brought the attention that it's actually not working. Obviously, the ticketing system seems to be very high, and a lot of fans are actually getting priced out of the game. This is something we're looking at today, a lot of different levels of it and how we can obviously combat that, but also another things to take away from maybe other leagues across Europe. And then we'll talk a little bit about Matt's journey so far along with Liverpool and see if there's any kind of new prospects coming out of there as well. So we'll start off, the actual topic of conversation today was brought in by one of my friends from college back in Blackpool, is Callum Molyneux. So he brought it to me about the fans being priced out of the game, how a lot of the clubs in the lower leagues have actually been putting their prices up alongside with match tickets. And then another one of my friends, Ali Sinclair, brought it to me saying that Wrexham in the conference was actually a lot higher than some European clubs as well. So we thought we'd look into this and bring it to your attention, because fan matters don't always get the biggest public opinion, but obviously if we can discuss about it face to face, then obviously this is something that we're going to be able to develop on and start with. So, when it comes to the first topic, when it comes to the turnover in the Premier League, we hear about the TV rights being bounced around a lot, and obviously talking about a lot of the clubs earning astronomical fees, but then they don't see the percentage of the tickets coming in. And I'd like Matt to just talk about quickly, when it comes to prices in the Premier League, what is the obviously price difference between the lower leagues in England?
So in terms of the Premier League, obviously it's a big issue at the moment, a big topic of discussion about how much should a Premier League ticket be, how much are people prepared to pay, and it does come back to basic economics at the end of the day. You know, for Liverpool, for Manchester United, people are prepared to pay 50-60 quid to go and watch a game, and if people are prepared to pay it, then obviously clubs are going to charge that amount. The issue is when we get further down the leagues, you know, how much should those prices come down? How much of a difference is there between the entertainment of the Premier League and, say, League One, League Two? I think personally there's a significant difference, and there should be a significant difference in the price, but we know that that's not the case. I mean, away tickets, for instance, we spoke before about how in the Premier League they've brought in this maximum of £30 for an away ticket, so that's the most that anybody can pay. Any club can charge up to £30. It doesn't have to be 30, it can be less, but most tend to do that. But in the Championship and lower down, that isn't the case. So 1 in 5 Championship games is apparently going to cost more than £30 for an away fan to attend. And you know, if Championship matches are going to be more expensive than Premier League matches, then we talked about basic economics, and that doesn't really comply, does it? No,
not at all. I mean, when it comes to especially the away tickets, a lot of clubs do try and subsidise the away travel as kind of a supplement or substitute for that. I mean, surely that can't be continuing across all the leagues, because a lot of the leagues don't have the financial ability to do that. A lot of the current Championship clubs, I'll put this on screen for the viewers. If you didn't know, you could also watch this on YouTube as well. But I've put together a table of obviously this current summer's transfers, outgoings and ingoings, and seeing the averages that have come through. So obviously the likes of Ryan Sessegnon going to Spurs and Jack Clark leaving Leeds for Spurs as well. And then a lot of the other actual transfers being bouncing around the league. But when you actually bring the summer equivalent all together, they're actually spending around 12 million on average, obviously that's boosted by the sales of Neil Mopai, around Sessignon and things like that. But on an average, you can see a £12 million increase to the club, and is that ever going to trickle down the leagues, do you think, or do you think that this will just be pocketed by the majority of the owners? Will the fans ever actually see this price come into effect and their match tickets fall?
It's really difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, the evidence at the moment is that it's not trickling down, but perhaps over the coming years that might turn out to be the case. I think for owners, obviously they're in it because of the money. Most of them are not supporters of the club. There's increasing numbers of owners who come in from abroad, and they've got absolutely no interest in the fans other than keeping the fans happy.
Yeah,
maybe brings more money.
Even in the UK, if it's just it doesn't even have to be from abroad. In the case of and I do distress to bring this up, but in case of Bury's case, buy the club for £1, and you're not even a fan of football. You're a businessman, but you have no idea of what it means to the fans, the supporters, the actual staff and the surrounding area as well. So sorry, I just wanted to bring in Bury there because that's a prime candidate for that kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean, economically it makes sense. You know, for me, on the face of it, if you're an owner and you come in, your investment is worth more if you keep the fans happy and you've got an asset in those fans. You know, as weird as it sounds to call them that,
yeah.
that is one way of looking at it, certainly. And if you can keep them happy and make sure that element of the team is content with what's going on, then I think that can be economically valuable. But there's far too many cases. We've seen Bury, there's Bolton as well, who obviously are still in a complete mess now. So obviously there's something not quite right there. The balance isn't quite there at the moment.
No, there's not. And I'd just like to bring on up about Blackpool as well. One of my friends who actually brought this question to us is a Blackpool fan. He's been there since the horrific part of the Oystons and way before that. And all they could do was boycott, and they boycott for a very long time. And obviously there's a little bit of a figure that brings it a little bit more into light. You discuss the amount of season tickets there were and the gate receipts. So when you're looking at it like that, they were actually bringing in a turnover of about 2.7 million in tickets around the time of going into the championship, and then after the boycott, that actually decreased to 700 to 800,000. So you can see the lasting effect there. But in the essence of tickets, that's not the only thing that keeps the fans happy. Obviously, it matters about on pitch performances, and can a club be kind of turned inside out by just starting with the fans? Is that possible to actually ruin a club from the inside out just with the fans and staff rather than the on pitch performances?
Yeah, I think they both go hand in hand, don't they? At the end of the day, you've got to have happy fans, and a lot of that, let's face it, is down to how well your team does. We spoke before off air about Manchester United and the expectations that they have. You know, I'm not a Manchester United fan myself, so I can't speak for all of them anyway, but I'd imagine that as long as they're winning matches and they're providing entertainment, then they're perfectly content. But lower down the leagues, is that the case? I'm not quite so sure. I think we talked about Bury as the example before. Obviously, it's a huge part of the community that they've lost. It's not just, you know, turning up on a Saturday. It's at the heart of Bury as a city, as a town. You know, the fans they've lost a big part of their lives there, and you've got to say that as much as I'm sure that they'd like to be higher up in the leagues, they'd like to have more attractive football.
Yeah.
Just the fact that they've got a football club there is a privilege almost. Well, it shouldn't be a privilege, but I think it probably is now.
Especially if they look at it that way, yeah. I mean, they'd take the club, whether it was in conference or anything, they'd snap your hand off for it at the moment, and I don't blame them because that is part of the community. You're very right. But it's not like before they were playing unattractive football at all. I mean, Danny Mayer, they had Dom Telford, they had quite a dynamic squad that was direct and scoring goals as well. So that is a prime prime position to look at it and be like, the on-pitch performances weren't the issue at all. It was the businessmen who crippled the club from the inside out, and obviously that's not what we want to be seeing. But let me just bring it back to Manchester United, and obviously their record transfer of Harry Maguire.
Yep.
And we all know that he started his club football at Sheffield, and they were in League One at the time, or maybe League Two when he started playing for them. I'm not entirely sure about that, but let's think about it this way. As I was talking, going back to the Championship and whether that can dilute down the leagues, do you think that with the resources of Premier League teams now and the statistic building, that they could identify young prospects like your Maguire a little bit earlier than usually before, and maybe that could impact the prices going up and maybe dilute down the leagues that way? How long do you think that'll take before we start seeing $1 million, $2 million plus transfers coming out of League One?
I don't think it'll be too long, to be perfectly honest. I think we've started to see a more statistical based view from lots of Championship clubs. I mean, I think it's Brentford who sort of initiated that almost, and they've been doing it for quite a long time now. Just in terms of picking up young players in a similar sort of way that Liverpool do, really. Players that you wouldn't necessarily think are perfectly suited, or you wouldn't necessarily go back for them. There's literally thousands of examples.
I was going to say, think about Andy Robertson for one. I mean, obviously him coming from Hull City for £10 million and now being arguably or debatably at the moment probably the best left back in Europe. So there's them kind of stats going forward.
Even someone like Mo Salah on a bigger scale. You know, he's not somebody that all the top European sides were looking at. I think his only option that particular summer was to come to Liverpool. So if it just goes to show, really, doesn't it, that if you get your statistics right and you know where to look, then there is value to be found. And 36 million it was that Liverpool paid for him. How much would he go for now? You know, probably 6-7 times that.
Yeah, probably, and I can't take that away. So I feel like maybe the younger talents, or maybe the most developing talents in the lower leagues, like you're looking, or you mentioned Brentford, so you've got Saïd Benrahma, probably one of the most dynamic midfielders in the Championship last year. Played a key part in Brentford's season, especially with Neal Maupay, who obviously got bought by Brighton. And I kind of want to understand how far or how much talent in League One can you see and actually bring that forward and see whether they can perform in the Premier League. So at the moment, obviously going back to Blackpool, I'd like to just say of how much they've developed and changed, and they won, I think it's 4 or 5 straight games, I think it's 4 games straight at the beginning of the season. And one of their key players was Sully Kakai. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Ex-Crystal Palace, he went over to Holland and now he's coming back. And I'm thinking, if he continues on the same vein of form he is at the moment, with some audacious goals and some very, very direct play, how much of that, or how much can a Championship club maybe come in for him and boost Blackpool maybe even further and decrease the ticket prices even further? Because going back to what they lost when the boycott was happening, it's been brought to my attention that they've put them up considerably, and my view on that is how much are they trying to retain back into the club, or that they've lost over them years? I know it's a new owner and everything like that, but do they think that Blackpool is now a club of that kind of calibre to bring in that kind of money from ticket value? And that comes back to the argument and the point at hand. What is too much for a League One and League Two club?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible really to put a figure of what is too much, because it all comes back to supply and demand, as we said before. I mean, you only have to look at Sunderland in League One, I think they are now, aren't they? And they're still getting 30,000 people every week. So you can't really say to them that they should be bringing them down. Obviously, on a moral point, of course, they should be as cheap as they possibly can be. But at the same time, if you've got such huge figures going along to watch them, that's more than a lot of Premier League sides. Would
you say that goes down to the fans, or would you say that goes down to the club's philosophy?
In terms of setting that price structure, I think, it's always going to be at the club's interest to keep the fans happy, but ultimately the way it is now, the clubs have got all the power, and fans are so loyal, aren't they? I mean, Sunderland fans, if they wanted to force those ticket prices down, yeah, probably they could do that. Probably they could boycott games. They could say, well, we're not going to go unless you take £10 off a ticket or whatever. But is that realistic? I'm not too sure.
But is that what it's going to take in English football now to boycott every time we need to bring down ticket prices to be able to make sure that fans actually attend games? So, as you said, you mentioned off camera a lot of the figures of, if you'd like to just display them in a moment, the figures when it comes to the amount of people that actually do go to games, the attendance figures, and whether does that go down to the fans of a collective fan group who just agree and will have and just go because of the sake of it, or is there amount of fans that actually just won't accept it and won't go for them kind of prices? And that's the point where which clubs need to action a fair price structure and actually increment them kind of tactics and sales strategies to actually get people into the club. And as you were saying off camera, I'd like to say in a minute, how much of this is actually going to impact the younger generation supporting that club? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, at the moment, as we are speaking now, fans are going to matches. Sunderland or whoever, they don't have an issue right now. But will that be the case in 10, 15 years' time? I'm not too sure. I mean, we look at the Championship now, and I think we said it was the fourth most watched league in the world. There's only the Premier League and one or two others, the Bundesliga and I think La Liga, who get more fans in stadia week in, week out. So again, what's the incentive for them at this moment in time to bring prices down? There probably isn't one. In terms of looking longer, into the future, perhaps clubs should be a little bit more proactive. I think over the next few years we are going to see clubs with less and less fans unless something does change. But, unfortunately, I think potentially we might have to see the negative impact. We might have to see a few empty stadiums for that to be implemented. Do I think that's right? Absolutely not. I think clubs should have much more foresight to go, well, we're all right for now, but Liverpool, for instance, you look around the stadium and the access is difficult. If you're a young fan looking to get in, we're talking here purely in terms of the finances, in terms of the cost of it, but it's also the access of getting in. That obviously that's not an issue for lots of other clubs across the country, but still the price of a ticket could inhibit somebody from going. And if you don't get into football when you're, say, a teenager or a young adult, as we are, when are you going to get into it? Because clubs are going to miss the boat, I think, with a whole generation of fans who will miss out on going for financial reasons. And if you miss out when you're young, are you then going to change your habits? People might just say, well, I've got into the habit of, going to the cinema. I go and do that because it's cheaper than football. Are you going to change over the next few years? I'm not too sure that you will.
And it's not like the actual clubs are incentivising that change at all at the moment either. So whether that's the case of whether you pick another hobby or a costly hobby, that might be, of actually going to a football game, that actually shows the difference in what fans will go and what won't go. And that financial gap is what's needed to be looked at. And I mean, I don't think that Liverpool's ticket system is correct by any means. It shows some loyalty to the fans that have been there, but then also shows quite limited views on the fans that have not been, maybe not been a supporter for very long, or they're too young to be able to do that, and the waiting list is so long. So that's when it comes to the lower league clubs, of what they can do to ticket prices to actually incentivise people to come and fill their stadiums. And another thing that they do add, along with for example, away day travel, etc., they do add these membership discounts to, say, food and drink into the stadiums, and then the merchandising discounts and things like that. Do these warrant and give accessibility to these fans, do you think, or does that just seem like a gimmick to make it feel to the fans that they're actually paying for what they get?
No, I think it does help to an extent. I think it might be Bradford or Brentford, a team in the Championship anyway, they give away free replica shirt to every season ticket holder that's under 16, and obviously we talked about free coach travel for fans going up and down the country, and those things are absolutely fantastic, and obviously they are a step in the right direction. But realistically, the main thing that clubs can be doing is bringing down the actual price of the ticket. Not everybody wants a replica shirt, you know. Okay, it comes free with your season ticket potentially, but you could just, you know, knock that price of a replica shirt off a season ticket, and that's probably for most people the better way of doing it. But yeah, unless, as I said before, unless fans either boycott or make it more vocal that they're unhappy and they just continue to pay it, it's not going to change.
No, I don't think it is at all. And if you look at the financial stats on this as well, then you're looking at it a very, very cynical view that a lot of clubs, admittedly not the lower down clubs, and I do appreciate that, and I obviously understand that a lot of their turnover does rely on maybe tickets, maybe merchandising sales, maybe the odd sponsorship deal here and there. But in the higher leagues especially, and as we've mentioned before, this money trickling down, that a lot of clubs in the Premier League especially will be easily making profit if no one came to the game.
Yeah.
So in these aspects, you need to look at the club's philosophies and see whether that's the case. So, for example, at West Ham, they're obviously leasing the Olympic Stadium at the moment, and they're making that very vocal that they want to be able to fill that every week. They have a very passionate fan base, a great away support. I've witnessed it myself, and all I want to say is that some season tickets in West Ham's ground is lower than League One and even conference teams. So if you're looking at football from that perspective, what is it that can be done, or maybe taken from leagues abroad, that could be implemented into England to actually factor in them costs to not only the League One clubs and fans, but then what is it that some Premier League teams need to take into consideration? Because you said that, I think it was off camera, that it was 85% of Premier League clubs are that's the attendance figures for them.
Yeah.
And then you said it was about 65, was it?
For West Ham, I think it's around 60-65%, but for the Premier League overall, it's about 85%.
Okay. So, in that regard, they're doing something to fill them stadiums. They're actually bringing down the ticket price in level with in conference teams, and that's incredible to look at. That a Premier League standard team is doing that, but are they forced into that because of the implication of the Olympic Stadium?
I think there's a couple of points. I think one is that they are forced because it doesn't look great if their stadium's half filled every week. You know, that doesn't look good for...
Say that to Man City.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, it doesn't look great. It doesn't reflect well on them and on their fans if they've got a stadium that isn't full. But the other point is the TV money. In the Premier League, there's really no excuse. You know, ticket prices... They're just a drop in the water compared to what Premier League teams pick up. I think the latest TV deal for the Premier League was just over 5 billion. The equivalent time period for the Championship was about a tenth of that. It was about £550 million. So to an extent, the Championship clubs do have to find a different way of making that extra money. If you're getting 10% of the income from television, then okay, you have to look at it in different ways, and how else can they make money? Ticket prices is one way of doing that. It's not necessarily the right way of doing it, but it is one way. And to a degree, you can kind of understand that they're trying to increase that funding stream, that revenue stream, and that's fine. But as we said before, is that a sustainable thing? Can you keep taking advantage almost of fans' loyalty? Can you keep doing that? Is it sustainable? Or more likely, I think, will they decide at some point, these fans, to go, well, I can't afford to go to every game, so maybe I'll go to 1 and 2. And again, it comes back to the attendances. If you're then losing that demand, you've got to alter the prices. There's no other way around that.
I think if you're looking at it like from that view, especially if it's just 1 in 2 games they're going to, how much is that going to snowball effect and maybe even have an impact on the children that support that club?
Exactly,
or maybe even the families in general that go. So yeah, that snowball effect is not something that you exactly want to be happening at your club. So when you see even decreasing attendances on a regular basis, surely that screams alarm bells, especially to us as fans if we're looking at a club from the outside in. And I know that is a very cynical view and a very, very one-minded view that, just because the attendances are decreasing then that's the case. But these Premier League clubs are world-renowned. These clubs are very big drivers for investment, not only very big drivers for that, but sponsorships as well. Why is it that you think that they aren't actioning on the TV money being a part of that for them, and why aren't they actioning on bringing them tickets down? So I think Arsenal's season tickets over £1,000, and that's. I know we're trying to focus on the EFL here, but you need to look at the big picture and start at the top. And if you're looking at season tickets 5 times as much as the top leagues in Germany, who arguably probably produce more attacking and probably more direct or entertaining football, as we like to say, what is it that's stopping them bringing them prices down? Or is it just because they want to look or have the sales tactic of premium pricing?
I think it's almost just become ingrained. It's a bit like it's a habit, isn't it? It would be a drastic thing to do now for the clubs to suddenly say, well, let's halve our season ticket prices. And you'd still be at least double what Borussia Dortmund fans, for instance, will pay for a season ticket. But you can sort of understand to an extent that we've got into this habit of a season ticket being £900, £1,000. To suddenly halve that would be a bit of a shock almost that clubs aren't really prepared to do. But for me, that can only be a good thing. Nobody's going to look at that and go, that's a bad thing that they've done that. From a fan's perspective,
I was going to say, maybe not on a business perspective, but
not from a business perspective, but from a fan's perspective, you want your club to be sort of projected in the best possible light. And if whichever top flight club does that first, imagine the reaction from all the other fans. They're going to be looking at whoever it is and going, why didn't we do that?
That might either start a trend or it might start war. One of them, because that club that will make that leap in a certain direction, yes, they'll be shone in a very good light and maybe arguably to some very extreme criticism from maybe investors, etc. But as I was talking to before, this brings us on to AFC Bournemouth. This was taken from the BBC in 2018, and it said that their turnover for 2008 for 16-17, was around 140 million, 135, 140 million, with 5.2 million of that from tickets, which means less than 4p for every £1 of their income was due to tickets. And I know that's just one club, and I know they have a very small stadium in grand scheme of things in the Premier League, but I don't think I don't ever see empty seats at Bournemouth Stadium at all, and I just feel like if they're putting it in that kind of light, surely to the bigger clubs their ticket contribution is next to nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Liverpool, and since they've expanded the stand, I'm pretty sure that the increased revenue doesn't come directly from ticket prices. It comes from the corporate seats that they've added. It comes from people buying stuff in the shop. It comes from selling food or whatever. And for me, if you halve the season ticket price, people will be more inclined to say, well, I'll buy a coffee at half time, or I'll buy a pie, or I'll buy, a replica shirt. I can't remember the last time I bought a replica shirt because the prices are just so ridiculous. If you're paying so much every week for a ticket, probably clubs are losing out in other ways. So they're almost shooting themselves in the foot in that particular way. I can just imagine, people are saying, well, I want to go to the match. That's the most important thing. What other bits around the match can I sacrifice in order to make that happen? People have only got a certain amount of money, and if the clubs want to use that all on the tickets, then I think they're just losing out in other ways. I don't think by increasing the prices it necessarily has as much of an impact as what they might think.
Especially not on lower league clubs, bringing it back to them. They don't have the luxury of having the big attendances, apart from maybe Sunderland, of course. But the hospitality boxes, the corporate lounges, etc. These had quite an increased impact on that. But is there not a part of Robin Hood here where you could take from the rich by putting up maybe the hospitality and corporate? Because if they're going for them kind of experiences, they can afford them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking at the working man, which in my opinion is struggling to now go and enjoy what was a hobby back then and a passion back then, and not only that, their community when they were outside of work is now being stripped away because of financial views, with obviously other things across going up in general as well, and then you've got the segregation of the working class between the north and the south of England. So that's probably a contribution towards Arsenal's Arsenal season ticket. Yeah. But what about the other clubs in that area? What about the smaller clubs like your Leyton Orient, your clubs around there? And you've got to be thinking, how much can they do to increase their ticket revenue, but without sacrificing the working class that go there? Because I know, it's just to start off the top of my head, from renting, especially in London, and it's coming. They're spending around 80 to 90% of their income every month is spent on rent, leaving 10% of their income. How much of that 10% do you think they're going to go and spend at a football game? Very unlikely. Yeah. And that's why you're kind of looking at it this way. Is the north and south divide going to impact the football even more? Or do you think that the corporate lounges and the clubs should look in a Robin Hood view and try and get more people into the club by making it more affordable down there and maybe charging a little bit more to the people up top?
I think it completely depends on the club. I mean, you look at Arsenal and certainly you could do that for them. Lower down the leagues, obviously corporate experiences are not quite as much of a factor for some people. I can't say that I watch a load of lower leagues, but certainly just from my perspective, looking from the outside, I would imagine that there's not as many corporate boxes and that sort of thing as you would get with the Premier League teams. But you're right. I mean, there's got to be some sort of compromise, and the majority of football fans are not going for the corporate experience. The majority of football fans are going because it's their hobby, it's something that they want to do, and it needs to be affordable in order for them to continue to do that. And I mean, we look at how much football's on TV now. You can get matches from wherever you are in the world. That's an added competition, isn't it? If you're a Leyton Orient fan, are you going to pay £30 to go and watch them? Or are you just going to watch a Premier League team on the TV?
Well, then you've got the added factor of, let's just break it down into BT, Sky, Premier Sports, and I think Amazon are in there this year, aren't they? They've got the whole of Boxing Day.
They've got Boxing Day, and they've got December rounds. The Merseyside Derby is going to be on Amazon as well.
So when you're looking at subscriptions just to those, I think it's well over £1,000 in a subscription a year. Okay, so you're talking to me that 7 months, 8 months, maybe a bit more, I think about 7 to 8 months worth of a season ticket at Arsenal is the same valuation of watching all of all of the games. Well, not all of the games, because you can't watch 3 o'clock kickoffs over here, which is still that's a debate for another podcast that I definitely will be delving into, because that law, or bylaw as it is in the Premier League, is outdated by a considerable margin. But how much of that can you look at and think, can I be spending the subscriptions a year? Not everyone does, I completely understand that. Not everyone does, and rarely many people will. But how much of that can you be spending and then going to your club as well every week?
Exactly, it all comes back to how much disposable income do people have. If you've got a load of disposable income, then fair enough, but the majority of people in this country have to make a choice, and if your choice is going to be to watch what is pretty much a game every day that's on TV now, we have Friday night football, we have Monday night football, every day of the week, what are you going to do? What's the best value for money? Is it watching it on the TV every day, or is it going once every fortnight to go and watch your local team play in the league? It's an obvious choice, isn't it? You go with the one that gets you the most football. So it's just another complication, another thing that needs to be factored in, and for me, obviously, over the next few years, it's going to become a bigger and bigger problem. And the sooner that clubs can get onto it and realise that, then the better for them, I think.
So another stat that I just wanted to bring up is that 31 of the 48 clubs in the bottom 2 tiers of England, okay, have actually average attendances last season were half of their stadium capacities, which is surprisingly alarming.
Yeah.
So, as a club, I'm going to ask you this as a direct question.
Mm-hmm.
As a club, majority of your revenue is coming through these channels of ticket revenue, your halftime pies and pints, your merchandising. Then you've got your odd sponsorship deal here and there. Especially at these lower league clubs, they don't really have that kind of availability of investors to their disposal. But what is it, do you think, that these clubs, that stat, these 31 clubs, can do to be able to change that philosophy and get more fans, or more proportionate amount of fans, whether it's young or old, into their clubs again?
Apart from decreased ticket prices, which I don't think is going to happen, there's a number of different options that we can look at. So one thing that always gets mentioned whenever we have this conversation is, let's make it a rule that every club in the EFL, to sign up to be part of it, you've got to have, let's say, 1% of your revenue goes back to fan-related causes. So it might be that 1% of your revenue, that means whatever it is. For obviously Manchester City, it's a huge amount. For teams at the bottom end of League Two, it's a small amount. Whatever it is, that percentage goes to one side and the fans benefit. They lose half of their season ticket cost, or whatever it is, it goes back into the fans. The obvious issue with that is revenues. How much can they be messed about with? How much is it going to become a thing where the teams at the top are saying, well, our revenue is slightly less than what it actually is, and how honest are clubs? I'm not too sure whether that would work. Obviously there's a few examples, without naming any names, that certainly fill in the finances and messing about with that. We've seen with financial fair play that doesn't necessarily work. So am I a fan of that? Probably not. In an ideal world, would it work? Yeah, I think it probably would do. But just getting more young people. Let's have an adult and child ticket. Let's say children go free on a particular game, or whoever it is. You could have under 21s for 1 week in a season, they go free. Is that going to have a massive impact on revenues? Probably not. If you get a taste for it when you're 5 or 6 and you can go in for free, probably the next week you're begging your dad to take you, or your mum, or whoever. The
engaging aspect of football then returns, and then we have some kind of positive light in that way.
We give someone a taster of it for free, and then they'll come back, and next time they'll have to pay a bit. It doesn't have to be a lot. A child ticket is often relatively cheap. It's more the adult has to go with them, and their ticket is then extortionately priced, which is often the issue. But yeah, other than that, I mean, we're looking at other ways of revenue coming into clubs. Can we get the TV money to be filtered down? I'm not sure that the Premier League is, I'm certain that the Premier League is never ever going to agree to that. The teams at the top are never going to agree to that. Looking again at percentages, can we get a certain transfer fee? We see players, we mentioned Andy Robertson, there's Harry Maguire, there's John Stones, who's obviously started off in the lower leagues and moved up. Can we say, a certain percentage of a transfer fee goes back into fans' causes? Well, how many transfer fees are actually reflective of the actual cost? I mean, it's always someone's moved from somewhere to somewhere for an undisclosed amount, or it's paid in instalments. So, where do you draw the line with that? Again, it is difficult, but potentially there's something in that. And the final idea really that often gets brought up, again without its own complications, is can we get more fans to be involved running their clubs? If fans are more involved with the season ticket prices, obviously they're going to bring them down themselves, but again, does that work? We've seen with Bury that the businessman isn't bothered about the fans. Would it just be a case of it being the other way around? If a fan was in charge of making all the decisions, would they just make decisions for the fans and not for the best, in terms of the business and that side of it? If you found the right person, and I think it's been quite successful in Germany with the fan ownership.
The big 50+1 rule is great.
Yeah, and it seems to work perfectly well over there. The question is, can we implement that now? Would it work? Would it be as effective as what we think it would be? I think it would be. It's certainly possible, but it would be a massive risk. So again, that's probably my preferred option out of all of them, just because we've seen it work in other countries. But again, is it a perfect solution? No, it isn't. And I think that sort of underlines the difficulty of the topic. That's why we're discussing it today, because there's no obvious answer, is there? I mean, there's no formula where you say, it's worked here, we'll apply it here. Some of the ideas might work for a certain club, or they might even work for a certain club for a certain amount of time, and then for whatever reason, things change, scenarios change, and it doesn't work. So it's really, really difficult. Another point as well, I mean, we've seen clubs at the top, fans, they demand success. Manchester United, Liverpool, Manchester City, they're probably perfectly happy to pay a certain amount because you get a certain amount back for that. You get value to an extent. Liverpool are winning virtually every week, and as long as that goes on, then fans are going to be prepared to pay whatever it is to get in and watch that team. Fans lower down the leagues, I don't know. I'm not a fan of a lower league club, but potentially they would be more willing, I would say, to accept we pay a bit less, but we get a bit less. Maybe we don't spend as much on transfers each summer because our revenue is a bit lower, but that's fine because we get season tickets which are affordable. It means we can go. It means, it all comes back to the community factor. I'm sure if you asked any Bury fan, are you happy with what's happening on the pitch? Do you want to overspend and spend more and more and more? No, they just want their football club. They want to go and watch it every week, and the sad thing is that they're not able to do that now because of what's gone on and because of the mismanagement. So in terms of expectations, can we be more forgiving of football clubs? Can we say, well, okay, I accept that we're not going to be the best team in the country, we're not going to win every week, but with that comes other benefits? I don't know, just an idea.
Yeah, because obviously with that aspect, it looks at then do the fans take their view as like we're not being ambitious enough? Is there not enough drive in the club? Are we heading in the right direction? Are we stagnating? And then in the lower leagues, you don't really see that as you want to see the progression, but in all fairness, you want to see week to week what the difference is in the team and how that drives, and that's down to the manager, the tactics, how it plays, and everything else, and the systems they use. But I always think that the nice part of it is the analytics, as we were saying, about maybe picking up younger, more unknown quantities, or rough diamonds, as I like to use on Twitter, for behind the pitch itself. And I just like to look at certain players that maybe haven't been given limelight, and in that aspect, are the transfers being able to filter down the leagues? And this TV money, as you said, they may not agree to it, but in time that money will filter down, whether it's through wages, whether it's through certain other aspects of transfers and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it could happen. I mean, having a fan-run club is something we probably all dream of in England, being a footballing nation and that being the driver. But when you're looking at it in any other terms, I just don't think that any business owner in the country who's not a fan of that particular club would ever agree to it. They just see the money side, and unfortunately that's the case. And one comparison that I found absolutely astonishing was Ali Sinclair brought to my attention that Wrexham's season ticket is actually £325 in the conference. And then we were discussing Dortmund, and he brought to my attention Sparta Prague, which equaled around £6 a game for Sparta Prague.
Yeah.
And it's looking near enough around 30 odd for if you were not a season ticket holder, of course, at Wrexham, and that's an incredible comparison. And obviously we look at a fan's point of view, what can we do to change that? There's many other options, but will it take shape? Probably not. That's why the podcast is here to discuss. And all I want to say is thank you so much for joining me today. Matt, it's been absolutely great and I can't wait to have you on again. This is something I want to bring to the end of podcast. So obviously with me, I just want to take one thing and ask you in a second. So you've done some interesting work with some youth obviously leagues and academies and stuff. Is there anyone in particular, whether it would be Liverpool or not, that's actually caught your eye maybe this season or last season that hasn't got the attention that they deserve? Because we've seen even Bobby Duncan, who's never made a senior appearance for us in a competition, head off to Fiorentina for £1 million. So is there anything else we could probably look for to come through?
Well, yeah, you put me on the spot there. Obviously, I've watched a lot of Liverpool's under-18s over the last couple of years, and Liverpool won the FA Youth Cup last year. They beat Manchester City in the final, and Bobby Duncan was a big part of that. I was fortunate enough to go along for the Liverpool Echo and cover that match, and it was a fantastic achievement for Barry Lutus's team, and many of those players I think have now gone up to the 23s, and obviously Bobby's moved on and gone to Fiorentina, but I think Liverpool's under 23s are struggling a little bit at the moment. They've not quite got that balance right, but certainly there's a real talented group of players there. For me, I think the one that I would pick out is probably Jake Kane, who is still with the under 18s for now.
Do you know what's actually quite funny? You won't know about this actually. He signed his first professional contract. You know about that?
Yes, yeah.
I actually approached him on Instagram for an interview and to talk about maybe statics and maybe even a podcast, which is quite funny. You brought him up and you had no idea about that. So no. That's great. So anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So fantastic midfielder. Obviously signed his first professional contract. He's been at the club since he was 8 or 9, and I've met his family. I've unintentionally sat next to his family at academy games, and he seems to be really grounded. He seems to be doing everything right. Certainly Barry Lutus absolutely loves working with him, and he's added goals to his game this year as well, and I can see sort of him moving up to the under 23s this season, so certainly one to watch out for.
Great, thank you for that, Matt. And the one that I wanted to make is a personal question. So this here is something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. It's an ambition of mine, and it's something that I'm looking to carry on, whether it be on a footballing platform elsewhere or to build up my own. I'm very happy to do either. But this is my ambition. What's yours, and where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm training to be a journalist at the moment. My primary sport is football. And it would be a dream of mine to go and work for the Liverpool Echo, go and work for their sports desk. Obviously nowadays it's not really a case of just writing, it's videos, it's podcasts. It's why I come on here and try and get as much practice of doing this kind of thing as I can. And yeah, for me, I'll finish my journalism training at the beginning of 2020, so not too far away. And the idea is to do as much freelance stuff as I can between now and then, continue to build my platform, continue to do as much stuff as I can with the Academy and with Liverpool's first team. And for those of you who don't know, I am a Liverpool fan. I don't hide that. So yeah, to go and cover Liverpool for the Liverpool Echo or for whoever else would be an absolute dream of mine, and hopefully that can take shape over the next few years.
Great, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I really do hope that you build your portfolio and achieve the place where you want to be. I hope we can work together sometime in the future. But this has obviously been the 1-2 podcast. We're going to be bringing this again as many times as we can. I hope you continue to listen, and if you have any contributing topics or any fan related things that you do think don't get enough light in the actual widespread media, then please bring it to our attention. I'd love to cover it and maybe do some research on it myself and have you on to discuss it. So thank you. This has been the 1-2 podcast, and I look forward to the next time. Thank you very much.